Today I want to talk about cgi-bin, its history, where it came from, and why I think it might become more relevant in the future. So the first question to ask is, what actually is CGI? And that stands for Common Gateway Interface. And what it was a standard created in the early 1990s that allowed applications to communicate with the internet, with other applications on the internet. So how did that work? You would have some sort of web server that's set up. A request would come in. The server would spin up let's say that the request was asking for a particular script to run. The server would actually create a brand new process and set up a pipe that talks to that process. And the process would read in from its standard in the process data, and they could the script can also look at environment variables to see data about the particular request. It does it processes the request, sends a response back to the server, which sends it back to the client, and then the process dies. Right. So that is the process behind CGI, where request, new process started up, the script processes the request, and then dies. A very simple way to set things up. Now, what's interesting about CGI is that not only is it simple, but it allows essentially any program that can read in from standard input, print to standard output, and read environment variables to be able to run as a service for the internet. That is a very interesting thing. The other very interesting thing about CGI is that it allows very simple ways to bring a service down, replace a service, upgrade a service, and deploy a service, because all that you have to do is drop a script into the cgi-bin folder and you've deployed your service. There's no need to restart the server or take it down or bring it back up. It allows you to just keep the server running at all times. And so what I want to do is I actually want to illustrate this with an example. So I created a very simple cgi-bin example. Oh, and the first thing I want to do is I actually want to show you the server that I'm using, which is lighty, which is pronounced lighty. And it's really spelled Lightttpd. And it's a very lightweight, fast web server, kind of like Nginx or Apache, but it has CGI and fast CGI capabilities. And so I picked it because it was a nice little simple web server to use. So the first thing I want to do is show that I have lighty installed. And you can see I have the latest version here. It's just a light and fast web server. And then here are some things that I've created previous to now. So I created this lighty.conf, which if we look at that, lighty.conf is really the configuration file for the web server that you're going to run. So in this case, there's different modules that you can activate. You can set up your document root where it looks for web pages to serve from. You can set up a server port and just a bunch of other little things. This is all available in the documentation on the Lighty website. You can see how to do TLS, SSL, TLS certificates. It also tells you how to secure your configuration file. So this is just for demonstration purposes, but all this is on the the website. All this configuration stuff is on the website. There's tutorials on the website, which is great. So that's the configuration file. Now I've already started the web server, and I will show you this by looking at my processes. And you can see that light HTTP or lighty is already working. It's already running. And the other thing to look at is that I have this bin directory, I've got this source directory, and this www directory. So let's first look at the bin directory. The bin directory has 3 different programs in here. And what I did is I just put .cgi here because in the configuration file I said my scripts will all end in .cgi. Now you don't have to do this, but I just did it for illustration purposes. So we've got hello CGI, JSON test CGI, and name CGI. Now, the other thing I want to look at is the source directory. So let's look at the source. And you can see I have 3 different programs here. I've got a hello.c, I've got a name.lisp, and then this JSON test directory. Inside that is a Go program, which we'll take a look at in just a second. So first what we'll do is we'll take a look at the hello.c program. And this is just a very simple program. There's no need for any special third-party libraries or HTTP libraries. All you do is you can read in from standard in and print to standard out. And so this particular program, what it does is you just print the content type with a couple new lines. And in this case, I'm printing plain text. And then I'm just going through all of the environment variables and I'm printing them out. Right? And see here at the end, I'm saying these were all of the environment variables. So that's all that this service does. It just prints these things out. And notice how just simple it is. There's no decorators, no third-party libraries, no HTTP, no web, no like web libraries or frameworks or anything like that. I can just write an extremely simple script and it will run properly. So let's go ahead and take a look at this thing that's already running. So we'll go to localhost 7001 cgi-bin and we'll look at hello.cgi. And so this is the program that ran. And you can see these are all the environment variables that was given to that C program. So you can see all kinds of information about where the request status, the script that was actually run. So the script itself can look at what script was run, the document root, what HTTP method was used, the protocol that was used, all kinds of information. So you can imagine in your script that you write or your program that you write for this endpoint, you have access to all of these environment variables. So you can actually, if your program needs to look at these things, such as the user agent or the port that the remote used, you can look at this. So that's that. We're going to take a look at the second program, which is a Lisp program. We're going to look at name. Actually, this is source name.lisp. And this is a common Lisp program, extremely simple. So we have a main function, and the first thing we print out is our content type. And this tilde% is actually a new line in common Lisp. So we have a couple new lines at the end of our content type. And then we print out our actual content that we want to send to the client. And in this case, we're wanting to say, hello, and whatever the name that person gave us. And the name we're giving through a query string. And so I'll show you the query string in a few seconds. But the code for this is just getting the environment variable of the query string and then splitting it by the equal sign and then getting the second element. Because remember that common Lisp is 0 indexed, so the first element starts at 0. The second element of a list is the 1. So what this does is essentially we'll have a name equals, and then there will be some kind of name that we give as part of the query string, and we're just going to grab that name and use it for hello. So we're going to say hello to whatever name that we had. So let's go and do that over here. So instead of hello CGI, we're going to have name CGI, and we're going to give it a query string of name equals, and we'll say Phil, right? And so now we have it saying hello Phil, and we can have another name, such as Bob, hello Bob, and that's how we can deal with query strings. And in fact, if we go back to say hello.cgi and give it a query string, you can see the query string has name equals Bob. And so in the common Lisp program, what we did is we split this string, name equals Bob, by the equal sign. And then we got a list of name and Bob. And then we just grabbed Bob at the end of the list. So that's how that worked. I want to tell you that this is not production code, right? This is just illustrative code, but that's what we did. I mean, normally you don't want to parse things that way. So the last thing I want to show is how a person would post data. Let's say you want to have a RESTful interface or some kind of other web API that we do in modern times. We can do that in CGI as well. And for this example, I have Go code. So we're going to do a JSON test and main.go. Oh, whoops, we don't want to do a CD. We'll just open main.go. So this is a simple Go program. And what I did is I defined a little type that has called a person, and it has a name and the person's favorite thing. And then we'll say, so this is the main program. And so all we do is, in order to read the payload data from the client, all we have to do is just read from standard input. So in this case, I only have to read a single line of text. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm reading a single line, and then that line of text will actually be JSON. And so I'm going to unmarshal that JSON into a person struct, and then I will print this thing back out. So going back to the client, we're going to say the content type is going to be plain text. And I only put one new line here because printline already puts a new line there. So there will be two new lines. And then we're going to print a line with the name of the person and their favorite thing. So we're just basically echoing back what the user gave us. Now, we also need a program to make a post request, right? An HTTP post. So what I did here is I also have a www folder. So inside there, I have an index.html, and this is a simple little web page that has a body here, which gives us two inputs for a name and a favorite thing, and then it gives us a button that will allow us to send a person's name and their favorite thing. And then I have this little div at the bottom, which we will just dump the text out of the response from the server. And so here, this is just the JavaScript that does all of this. And this is actually kind of old school JavaScript. It's compatible with browsers going back to, maybe 2003 or so. So that's all this does, is it creates an XML HTTP request, creates some JSON, and sends it to the server. So let's go ahead and go to our index.html. Oh, whoops. I spelled it incorrectly. HTML. And here's our index.html page. We just have a name and a favorite thing. So we're going to go ahead and we'll say, Captain Kirk. And his favorite thing is the Enterprise. And so we'll send this along, and the server comes back and it says, okay, we have a name of Captain Kirk and a favorite thing of Enterprise. And this is exactly what we printed out in our Go program. So that is kind of a whirlwind tour of CGI. And hopefully it looks a little bit interesting to you. The one last thing I wanted to say about CGI is, why should we be concerned about CGI in modern times? See, in the past, the reason why CGI was essentially became less popular. It still exists today and it's still used in some places, but it's just not very popular at all. What's popular right now are typical web servers like Apache, Nginx, and so forth. And there are very, very different kinds of things. We tend to have web frameworks where you have one language, say Java, and you have a framework that you do all of your web programming in. Now, the downside of the way that we do things today is that these web frameworks for these web applications, they can end up being large and complicated and provide a large surface area for vulnerabilities and attacks. The other thing that's problematic with these sorts of things is, say you're using a language like Go or Java with a garbage collector. If you're running a very large service that has, say, spikes in data of requests, you can end up running into a case where your garbage collector ends up, reserving a bunch of memory and it never lets it go. And then you just run out of memory. And so people have, done all kinds of crazy things, spending enormous amounts of time making sure that they don't produce much garbage, sometimes modifying the code of the programming language itself, turning off the garbage collector, all kinds of crazy stuff, just so that we can have this big, server web framework. If you think about how CGI works, all of that kind of disappears. It doesn't matter if you're using Go or Java or anything else. What happens is for every request, you spin up a new process, and that process only that request, and then it dies. So you can imagine, say you have a bunch of small requests and then a big request comes in. Well, it doesn't matter if you're using a garbage collected language and this big request comes in. The memory will be allocated for that request. The request will be processed, and you don't have to worry about this long-running garbage collection process. The memory will just be freed because the process ends. And so all of this tremendous amount of effort that we put into things could just disappear overnight if we used cgi-bin. The other thing that's good for cgi-bin is that it allows you to use multiple languages at once on the server seamlessly and with practically zero effort, right? So if you decide that you want to use, like a certain Java web framework, you're going to be stuck with Java. And let's say that you want to have some machine learning stuff that's in Python with some OpenCV libraries or anything like that. It becomes much more difficult to do. But with cgi-bin, you just drop your Python code in there and you say, hey, I want you to run this particular code. If it's Python, I want you to run it with the Python interpreter. In my examples that I gave here, I just had binaries that were run, but you can also set it to run scripts, which is where PHP comes from and all these other things. You can have Lua scripts and everything else. So this allows you to use the right tool for the right job, which is really interesting. And the other thing that I've already showed is that updating or modifying these scripts is very simple. You just replace the script. If you want to take down a service, you just remove that script from the bin directory, and the service is now down. If you want to upgrade the service, you just replace that binary, and now you have a new patch for the service. In fact, we'll just take a second and actually do that. Let's go into the source for our hello.c program, and let's delete this. These were all the environment variables line. So we'll take that away. We'll compile our hello program. Actually, let's just go into the source directory, and we will compile our hello world our hello.c program. We'll have an output of hello.cgi, and there we go. We've compiled this hello.cgi, and then we're going to move it to hello. Hello CGI is going to be moved to the bin directory, and so that's it. We've actually deployed a new version of our program. So let's go back over here and actually run this cgi-bin hello.cgi. And you can see at the end of our program, or at the end of this page here, these were our environment variables is now gone. That line is gone. So we have a new version that is deployed. So we could imagine that this was, say, a security fix or update. And so it's that simple to do it. And so this is actually a very powerful way of running servers. And if you think about how the servers run today versus the servers that we had in the early 90s, the amount of computation that you had was, relatively tiny. So the overhead of spinning up a brand new process was pretty high. But if you think about certain types of servers that we run today, if your individual requests aren't that, if you don't have a lot of requests per second, but you have lots of computation, then cgi-bin starts looking very like very tempting, because because if you think about, say you're running machine learning stuff or something where you're doing lots of computation, the overhead of spinning up a brand new process is relatively tiny compared to the sheer amount of data that you're covering or computation that you're doing on all of this data that you're working with. And so for those kinds of loads where you maybe want to have a very diverse and dynamic system using multiple programming languages, and maybe you're doing lots of data computation, just using regular old cgi-bin will actually be faster and more efficient than having a very heavy-duty Kubernetes cluster with Docker containers, with having a Docker container for every function that you're running. You can actually have a really lightweight, easy to use, easy to deploy system here. So that's something to think about. It's obviously not going to be for every use case, right? There's if you're going to have lots of very tiny requests that are coming in continuously very fast, spinning up a new process for every one of those things, it wouldn't be very good. In that case, you might want to take a look at fast CGI. And the difference between CGI and fast CGI is that fast CGI actually opens up a pool of these scripts, so and keeps them ongoing running. So instead of spinning up a single process for each request and saying, oh, handle this request and then die, what you do is the server actually gives a request to a long running process. So that way you could actually, there's no overhead of starting up the process anymore. The process starts up at the very beginning of the server. And so that allows you to reduce that overhead. It kind of makes things a tiny bit more complicated to run the server, but it gives you, allows you to process lots of requests per second. But if you don't have that, which if you think about the vast majority of servers that run today, or at least for the different kinds of businesses that are running, you're not processing, hundreds of thousands of requests per second. You're maybe processing tens or hundreds of requests per second, which in that case, using just regular old CGI might actually be a better way to do things. And so that's basically all I wanted to say for today. And maybe later on I'll talk about fast CGI or something like that, but maybe not necessary. But that is just a very interesting thing I wanted to talk about, CGI. It may be good for your business. It may be good for your private servers that you're running. Maybe you can simplify things and actually use less server capacity, right? And save some money. So that's all I have to say about that. Until next time.